So most of the hamstring injuries I've looked at in the studies and even practically occur during sprinting and running. You'll have the odd case where somebody, is reaching over to get a ball and pulls a hamstring, or somebody falls on them. That happens. Often characterized as a strength issue. So somebody injures their hamstring, they test them. Oh, you're weak on that side. Well, yeah, it's painful. Like Rob was telling me about that. It's a noxious stimulus. You experience pain. It's going to shut things down. You're not going to produce force. Great. So, I don't necessarily think it's just a strength issue. I know a lot of people are getting into these Nordics now and eccentric strengthening. I've always had really good results by teaching people how to run properly. But it's typically an afterthought. So I see acceleration as a safe means of producing specific strengthening. Running specific, but there's crossovers to other things. Improves qualities required for seamless return to play and running-based sports. Incorporate strength, speed, mobility, and overall conditioning. So when we've had people go through just 10, 15, 20-yard accelerations every day as part of an RTP process for hamstring rehab, everybody thinks they're going to be detrained by the end of it. But guess what? They're running faster than they would if they were in practice by doing 10, 20-yard sprints at high quality. So when they get back to practice and playing, they're actually really good compared to the rest of the team because they're not doing the slow practice stuff and they're working on actual quality stuff. Probably longer and more, you have a one-on-one opportunity or one-on-two if you're working with two guys to coach. And that's, when people got injured in the football scenarios, I'd be like, this is great, I actually get to coach now, right? So I don't see it as a bad thing when somebody pulls a hamstring. I'm like, hey, great, let's work. Let's make you better. And the one study I keep going back to was this one from 2014, Sherman's, where in healthy conditions, there's a lot of dissociation amongst the hamstring muscles. It says with a semitendinosus having a prominent role in producing torques around the hip and knee. In injured hamstrings, there tends to be more symmetrical activation patterns and compensation. So they all come in together like, hey, somebody's injured, so let's come together and let's fix it. But unfortunately, they tend to remember that state, and you have to train it out. And if you just do weight room stuff, it doesn't always work very well. You actually have to get them to run. So the biceps femoris compensates for the functions of a semitendinosus, and 83% of running-related hamstring injuries tend to be biceps femoris. So I find that interesting. So the neurological and muscle activation side is very interesting to me as part of the running process and the prevention side, not just the rehabilitation side. So I love showing this video. It's probably the best video ever made. It shows the guy who trains with weights and is muscular and obviously has strong hamstrings, from a weight room point of view. But when you get him to run, he blows out both hamstrings. So again, I'm not saying weightlifting is bad. I'm saying do some running as well under a competent coach. So the running piece is, I'd love to show that again, but I won't. The running piece is really important. And so when I'm looking at doing some running with people, we'll start with just a basic falling start, which unloads the athlete a bit. If we start a bit lower, he gets into a deeper acceleration posture. So a low position, he has to push out a little more, he'll have a lower position, which, when you're training athletes, it's important to have different start positions. If we're doing a return to play process and I don't want to put too much stress on the athlete, we might start from a higher position. And you can see the difference in the departure angle. So messing around with different start positions, if you're doing stuff off the ground, obviously there's more power required to get them going. They tend to push harder and they tend to hold position longer. Whereas if you're just doing a run-in start or a walk-in, they'll have a higher position. So manipulating that is very important as part of a progression, whether you're starting them at the beginning of your 5-week off-season training period. You might do some easier stuff, upright, submaximal, and then get into harder starts a little further in. We'll talk a bit about that. But you can see the difference in the angle and where their foot strikes relative to a center mass. So there's things that you can manipulate. I can say, go do 10-yard sprints or 20-yard sprints, and you're like, oh, that's really boring. Well, change the start, mix up the start. You can get different adaptations by changing how you start. And a lot of times I'll send my programs to coaches and teams. They're like, hey, it looks like the last one. I'm like, did you really look at the program? Did you look at, how many of those 10-meter segments or 20-meter segments I had in there, how we started them? How much recovery we had between, because those are the key elements. It's not whether or not I'm pulling a sled. I mean, I love equipment just as much as anybody, but let's start with getting the running down first, and then we can look at some of these other things. So in a basic return to play process, somebody gets hurt. We don't really do much with them in the first 48, 72 hours, but a lot of time we'll start with drills. And again, if everything's vertical, it works really nicely because I'm not putting those eccentric stresses. You know, I'm not reaching out and I'm not stressing the hamstring eccentrically, not going to get much pain. The thing that I told the athletic trainers was that you're going to feel something. And it's not bad. It's not going to be pain, but it's going to be like the best word I could come with. It feels like somebody's tugging at your hamstring. But it's not painful. It's just working it. And I think that's what I'm looking for when I start people initially in the first vertical support phase. You know, do you feel it? Yeah, I feel it. Okay. And if somebody can't lift that high, then we make them lift a little lower, and then eventually we progress to higher positions. We progress to more forceful, you know, ground contacts, whether it's a skip or a running high knee. And then eventually we get them to doing short accelerations. Pretty quickly, 3 to 5 days, we'll start with 300 yards of accelerations. And we're not going 100% here. They may just fall out of it and take a few steps, finish 10 yards, turn around, come back, do it again. And that's part of the process of conditioning, establishing some trust and safety, you know, within the athlete to know that, hey, I can do this. And most of the time, and I know some of you have done this protocol, you get results really quickly, and people feel like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm going to get back. And I think that's part of it too, the psychological part of it. Even like from a placebo point of view, what are you doing for rehab? Well, I'm running. Oh, that's really good, right? What are you doing for rehab? Well, I'm sitting on a table and some guy is just, you know, doing ultrasound on me. Ooh, that's not so good. So why not? I just had tremendous success with it. And most of the time, we're probably here the 5 to 12 days, you know, before somebody can get back into practice or even, you know, run fast. It's a lot quicker than you may think. And you just have to do it rep to rep, set to set, ask them how they're doing, how does it feel. Don't be afraid to cut things off and say, okay, that's good. You did better than yesterday. I'm pretty happy with that. And then as part of it, you're teaching them how to run. Like, it sounds really strange, but the more I talk to people, I'll hear like, oh yeah, the guy's in the NFL, he doesn't know how to run. He doesn't know how to block. He doesn't know how to, I'm like, well, what happened here? And so you have to teach these guys, even though they're professionals, you may have to teach very basic fundamental things. And that's not bad. It's just we got to work where we're at, and we have to improve these things. And I think if somebody gets injured, that's your opportunity. So drills are used as a diagnostic tool. I like drills. You know, a lot of people are crapping on drills now. I use them. Seems to work okay for me. I use 10-meter segments as part of this repetition. As part of this process, 10 by 10. Start with 300 meters and go up 100 meters per day. And it works very well, and it gets a little faster. And I don't even have to cue people to run faster. They just kind of do because they're feeling better. And I say settle in on a velocity and go with it and accumulate load over time. Sometimes you'll get people and they'll be running through a set and they're like, oh, it feels pretty good. Should I go faster the next one? Usually my response is no. Like, hey, you look pretty good there. It's faster than you did yesterday. Let's accumulate some load at that velocity for that day. And then the next day we can try it. So I'm very careful about, you know, getting overexcited and overzealous about, hey, look at the progress. Look how great a coach I am. He's running fast already. So you got to pull back a lot. So I just included this in here so you could have it as part of the notes, but it shows, you know, just a basic progression over 10 or 11 days of different degrees of hamstring strains and how I would approach it. You know, it's pretty straightforward. There's obviously variation here. Some people will be responders, some people not so much. Some people don't want to get better, and that's completely you know, possible. So, but for the most part, this kind of progression has worked. Sort of shorter to longer, you know, making sure they run a little faster. But if you make them run farther, they tend to run a little faster. So there's 11 weeks there. And I'll usually work out in 5-yard increments, which is a couple of strides, you know. And the way we do it, is we set a cone in the middle, we run 10 meters, decelerate, turn around, run back, and just do that for 10 reps. And again, they're going sub-maximally so that you don't need the same kind of recovery as if you're teaching somebody how to sprint fast. As obviously they go farther and they get faster, then you can knock off these and just have them do a walk back, and then eventually you're doing normal sprint training where they get a reasonable rest in between each rep. But that's something that really, as you coach, you'll kind of get a sense for. You're like, okay, that looks pretty good. How are you feeling? Okay, you look pretty good. Let's do another set at that velocity. The one thing I do cue a lot is I talk a lot about frequency and keeping the frequency high. You'll see that a lot of the time people stay at about 4.5 strides per second at different velocities. Like I didn't put video, I have a 5-year-old, and she runs at about 5 strides per second. But her strides are like this long. But the frequency is kind of innate to run fast. So I'll say, look, don't try to get really powerful strides, and let's just work on frequency. And then as you get better, eccentrically we can stress the hamstring more, and they'll stride out a little more. And then the stride length actually starts to fit their body, and they stick with that frequency. But I'm always using frequency because I think it helps disperse the force initially. So I use that picture a lot. I'm like, look, it's a lot of nails, right? So it doesn't go straight through your chest, right? So frequency, high frequency, it'll disperse the force, it'll support you a little better, and then as you get stronger, we can work to one nail.